The gunshot that rang through Oak Ridge's First Baptist Church on that sultry Sunday morning in 1878 wasn't from a six-shooter, but might as well have been for the silence it commanded. Josephine Winters had done the unthinkable. She'd spoken her mind during Reverend Thornton's sermon about a woman's place in society. "With all due respect, Reverend," Josephine had said, rising from her pew with trembling hands but a steady voice, "I cannot agree that God intended for women to remain silent in matters of justice. The good book teaches love for all, not the subjugation of half of humanity." The congregation gasped collectively. Women simply didn't challenge the preacher, especially not Josephine, the 22-year-old daughter of the town's late physician. She'd always been odd reading books meant for men, speaking plainly when a demure nod would do, but this was beyond the pale. Reverend Thornton's face had turned the color of ripe beetroot. "Miss Winters," he'd thundered, "you forget your place. The scripture is clear. Women shall remain silent in church. 1 Corinthians chapter 14, verse 34. "And what of Galatians?" Josephine had countered. "There is neither Jew nor Greek, slave nor free, male nor female, for you are all one in Christ Jesus." That was when everything in Josephine's life changed. Within 3 days, she'd been cast out not just from the church, but effectively from the town itself. No one would hire her to teach at the schoolhouse as she'd done since her father's passing. No shopkeeper would sell to her directly. Whispers followed her through the dusty streets: troublemaker, blasphemer, uppity spinster. Now, as Josephine packed her meager belongings into a single trunk, tears threatened but didn't fall. 6 generations of Winters had lived in Oak Ridge, and she would be the first to leave in disgrace. The knock at her door startled her. "Mrs. Pembroke?" Josephine acknowledged the landlady, a pinch-faced widow whose expression suggested she'd been sucking lemons. "Your week is up tomorrow, Miss Winters. I trust you've made arrangements." "I have," Josephine lied. In truth, she had nowhere to go. The stagecoach fare in her pocket would take her to Silver Creek, 30 miles west, but what awaited her there was anyone's guess. "Good," Mrs. Pembroke sniffed. "I can't abide having my reputation tarnished by association." After the landlady left, Josephine sat heavily on her bed. The room that had been her home for 3 years suddenly felt like a prison cell. She glanced at the small stack of books on her nightstand, medical texts of her father's, novels her mother had loved, a worn Bible with passages she'd marked that spoke of equality and justice. "Lord," she whispered, "I cannot believe you meant for truth to be silenced." Dawn came too quickly. Josephine loaded her trunk onto the back of the stagecoach, ignoring the stares of townspeople who'd gathered to witness her departure. She held her head high, though her heart ached. As the coach lurched forward, she permitted herself one backward glance at the only home she'd ever known. The journey to Silver Creek was jarring, both physically and emotionally. Josephine shared the coach with a traveling salesman who couldn't stop talking about his miracle elixirs, and an elderly couple who pointedly avoided eye contact after learning her name. By the time they arrived, dust coated every inch of her navy traveling dress, and her spirits had sunk to match the setting sun. Silver Creek wasn't much a main street flanked by the usual establishments: general store, saloon, hotel, livery, and the inevitable church with its steeple reaching skyward like an accusatory finger. "End of the line," the driver called, helping the elderly couple down before turning to Josephine. "You got folks meeting you, miss?" "No, sir," she replied. "I was hoping to find lodging and perhaps employment." The driver's expression wasn't encouraging. "Might try the hotel. They sometimes need help with laundry and such." Josephine thanked him and retrieved her trunk. The Silver Creek Hotel was a 2-story affair that had seen better days. Inside, the proprietress, a hard-faced woman named Mrs. Holbrook, looked Josephine up and down with suspicion. "I don't know what they told you in Oak Ridge, but we don't need any school teachers here," she said bluntly. Josephine's heart sank. Word travels fast. Like wildfire, Reverend Thornton's cousin is our minister. He sent a telegram. "I see." Josephine straightened her shoulders. I'm not seeking a teaching position. I need a room and any honest work you might have, Mrs. Holbrook's laugh held no humor. Honest work. For a woman who publicly contradicts men of God, I think not, Miss Winters. Try the saloon if you're that desperate. They don't much care about a woman's reputation. The door closed firmly in Josephine's face. Standing alone on the boardwalk with her trunk, she fought back tears of frustration. The saloon across the street glowed with lantern light, raucous laughter spilling from its swinging doors. Working there would confirm everything people already thought about her and likely lead to situations she'd rather avoid. "Excuse me, miss. You look like you could use some help." Josephine turned to find a tall man regarding her with curious blue eyes. His clothes were dusty from the trail denim trousers, a faded blue shirt, and a wide-brimmed hat that had seen many seasons. Despite his weathered appearance, there was something kind in his gaze that made her pause. "I'm fine, thank you," she replied automatically, pride not allowing for anything else. He glanced at her trunk, then back at the hotel door that had just shut in her face. "Begging your pardon, but you don't look fine. You look like someone who needs a meal and a place to stay." "And I suppose you're offering both." Josephine couldn't keep the edge from her voice. "I'm not that sort of woman, sir." To her surprise, the man laughed a genuine sound that crinkled the corners of his eyes. "I'm not that sort of man, Miss Winters, Josephine Winters." "Pleased to meet you, Miss Winters. I'm Kieran Donovan." He removed his hat briefly, revealing dark hair streaked with sun-bleached strands. "I own a ranch about 5 miles outside of town. My housekeeper, Mrs. Chen, is getting on in years and mentioned she could use an assistant." "Would that interest you?" Josephine studied him, searching for signs of deception. She'd learned early in life that offers that seemed too good to be true usually were, especially when they came from men to women alone in the world. "Why would you offer employment to a complete stranger, Mrs. Chen doesn't ask for help lightly. Finding someone in Silver Creek has proven difficult." He paused. "And if I'm being honest, I recognize that look you've got, like the whole world's turned its back on you." "You don't know anything about me," Josephine countered. "I know Reverend Simmons was at the telegraph office earlier, looking mighty pleased with himself. And I know good people sometimes run afoul of men who mistake their own opinions for God's will." Kieran's expression remained neutral, but his words sent a jolt through Josephine. "You're not concerned about employing a woman who's been banished from her church? Miss Winters, I left Ireland during the famine. Catholics weren't exactly welcomed with open arms. I've learned to form my own judgments about people." Josephine weighed her options, which were admittedly few. "What exactly would my duties entail?" "Helping with cooking, cleaning, mending whatever Mrs. Chen needs. You'd have your own room in the main house, meals provided, and a fair wage. And your expectations of me would be limited to household duties," Josephine pressed, needing clarity. Kieran's expression shifted to one of understanding. "Miss Winters, I'm offering employment, not anything improper. You'd be under Mrs. Chen's supervision, and she runs a tight ship, believe me." Something in his straightforward manner eased Josephine's suspicions. The alternative was to sleep on a bench until morning and then face more closed doors. "I accept your offer, Mr. Donovan, though I'd like to meet Mrs. Chen before making a final decision." Kieran nodded. "Fair enough. My wagon's at the livery. I can take you to the ranch now if you're willing. If you don't like the arrangement, I'll bring you back to town tomorrow." An hour later, Josephine found herself in a wagon beside Kieran Donovan, her trunk secured in the back, heading away from Silver Creek as the last light faded from the sky. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable, each lost in their own thoughts as the wagon rumbled over the uneven road. "May I ask what brought you to Silver Creek?" Kieran finally asked. "Most people passing through are heading somewhere else." Josephine considered deflecting but decided on honesty. "I spoke out of turn in church. The reverend was preaching about women's submission, citing scripture to justify keeping us from voting, owning property, or having a voice in community matters. I disagreed publicly. And for that, they ran you out of town." Kieran's tone held disbelief, for that and for refusing to apologize afterward. Josephine sighed. I was raised to believe that God wants us to use the minds He gave us. My father was the town physician. He taught me that questions lead to understanding. Your father sounds like a wise man. He was. He died 3 years ago, pneumonia, nothing I could do. The old pain resurfaced briefly. My mother passed when I was 12. After father died, I supported myself by teaching at the school until 3 days ago. Kieran was quiet for a moment. For what it's worth, Miss Winters, I believe speaking your mind shouldn't cost you your community. Thank you, Mr. Donovan. As they crested a small rise, Josephine saw lights twinkling in the distance. Kieran's ranch soon came into view, a sprawling main house with a broad porch, several outbuildings, and a large barn. It was considerably more substantial than she'd expected. Welcome to Willow Creek Ranch, Kieran said as they approached. It's not much, but it's home. Not much. Josephine couldn't help but sound incredulous. It's twice the size of any home in Oak Ridge. Kieran smiled slightly. Started with nothing but this land and some cattle. Been building it up for 15 years now. He helped her down from the wagon in front of the house, its windows glowing with warm light. The door opened before they reached it, revealing a small, elderly Chinese woman with silver-streaked black hair pulled into a tight bun. You're late, mister. Donovan, she said, her accent melodious but her tone firm. Supper's nearly cold. Had to make a stop in town, Mrs. Chen, Kieran replied, gesturing to Josephine. This is Miss Winters. She might be able to help you with the household duties we discussed. Mrs. Chen's dark eyes assessed Josephine with the precision of a jeweler examining a gemstone. You know how to cook, clean, mend? Yes to all three, Josephine answered. I've managed my own household since my father died, and I helped care for him before that. Any experience with large households? I often assisted with church socials and community events. Mrs. Chen made a non-committal sound. Come inside. We'll talk while Mr. Donovan sees to the horses. The interior of the ranch house was surprisingly refined, well-crafted furniture, polished wood floors covered with quality rugs, and bookshelves lining one wall of the front room. Mrs. Chen led Josephine through to a spacious kitchen where a pot simmered on the stove and fresh bread sat cooling on the counter. Mr. Donovan said you need an assistant, Josephine ventured when Mrs. Chen remained silent. These old bones don't move like they used to, the woman finally said. House is too big for one person to manage properly. Ranch hands need feeding, laundry never ends, and Mr. Donovan deserves better than a half-clean home. I'd be happy to help with whatever you need. Why did you leave your town? Mrs. Chen asked abruptly. Josephine hesitated, then decided honesty was best. I spoke up in church when I disagreed with the reverend. Women aren't supposed to do that. To her surprise, Mrs. Chen smiled, a quick flash that transformed her stern features. In my village in China, elder women were respected for their wisdom. America has strange ideas about when women should speak. She nodded decisively. You'll stay. I'll show you your room after supper. Just like that, Josephine had a job and a place to live. The relief nearly buckled her knees. Supper was a simple but delicious affair of beef stew, fresh bread, and apple pie. Kieran joined them, and Josephine observed the easy rapport between him and Mrs. Chen. It was clear the housekeeper held a position of respect, not just employment. Mrs. Chen tells me you've agreed to stay, Kieran said as they finished their meal. If you're still offering the position, Josephine replied. I am, and Miss Winters? He met her gaze directly. Whatever your thoughts or opinions, you're welcome to express them freely in this house. I've no use for forced silence. Those simple words, so contrary to everything she'd been told a proper woman should expect, brought unexpected tears to Josephine's eyes. She blinked them away quickly. Thank you, Mr. Donovan. That means more than you know. Josephine's room was on the second floor, a pleasant space with a comfortable bed, a small writing desk, a wardrobe, and a window overlooking the eastern pastures. Mrs. Chen had placed fresh wildflowers in a jar on the windowsill, a small gesture that made Josephine feel welcomed. That night, as she lay in bed listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the ranch, distant lowing of cattle, the soft hooting of an owl, the creak of the house settling, Josephine felt the first stirrings of hope since the fateful Sunday in Oak Ridge. Perhaps here, miles from the judgmental eyes of her former community, she could build something new. Morning arrived with golden light streaming through her window and the scent of coffee and bacon wafting up from the kitchen. Josephine dressed quickly in her plainest day dress and pinned her honey-brown hair into a simple bun. When she entered the kitchen, Mrs. Chen was already busy at the stove. "Good, you're up," the older woman said by way of greeting. "Biscuits need making, ranch hands hungry, Mr. Donovan's been up since dawn." Josephine set to work immediately, falling into an easy rhythm with Mrs. Chen. By the time the ranch hands filed in for breakfast, 6 men of varying ages, all with the weathered look of those who worked outdoors, she had prepared 24 biscuits and helped serve up plates of eggs, bacon, and fried potatoes. Kieran entered last, nodding to Josephine as he took his seat at the head of the table. "Men, this is Miss Winters. She'll be helping Mrs. Chen from now on. I expect you to show her the same respect you show me." The men murmured greetings, curiosity evident in their expressions but manners keeping them from asking the obvious questions. Josephine served coffee, trying to ignore their glances. One man younger than the others, perhaps 20 or so, doffed his hat politely. "Welcome to Willow Creek, Miss Winters. I'm Benjamin, the boss's foreman." "Thank you, Benjamin," she replied, grateful for the simple courtesy. After breakfast, as the men filed out to begin their day's work, Kieran lingered. "How are you settling in, Miss Winters?" "Very well, thank you, Mrs. Chen has been most welcoming." "She likes you," Kieran observed. "That's not a small thing. Mrs. Chen's particular about who she allows in her kitchen." "I'm grateful for the opportunity, Mr. Donovan," he nodded. "I'll be checking fence lines on the north pasture today. Likely won't be back until supper." He hesitated, then added, "If you need anything, Benjamin's usually around the barn or corral." As the days passed, Josephine settled into life at Willow Creek Ranch. The work was hard but satisfying, helping Mrs. Chen prepare meals for the ranch hands, mending shirts and trousers worn through at the knees, scrubbing floors, and learning the rhythms of ranch life. Mrs. Chen proved to be a patient teacher, showing Josephine how to manage the large household efficiently. "Mr. Donovan is good man, Mrs. Chen told her one afternoon as they shelled peas on the back porch. "Came to California during gold rush. No luck with gold but smart with cattle. Bought this land when nobody wanted it. Now everyone envious." "He seems very capable," Josephine agreed, trying to match Mrs. Chen's rapid pace with the peas. "HMPH. Capable, yes. Stubborn also, yes. Needs wife but too busy for courting." Mrs. Chen shot Josephine a meaningful glance that made her cheeks warm. "I'm sure when the right woman comes along he'll make time," Josephine replied diplomatically. Mrs. Chen chuckled. "Maybe right woman already come along, Mrs. Chen. I've only been here a week, and Mr. Donovan hired me as household help, nothing more." "Old eyes see many things," was all Mrs. Chen would say, returning to her peas with a small smile, despite her protests to Mrs. Chen. Josephine couldn't deny that Kieran Donovan intrigued her. Unlike most men she'd known, he seemed comfortable with her intelligence and untroubled by her outspokenness. During supper, he often asked her opinion on books or current events, listening attentively to her responses. She learned he subscribed to 3 newspapers and had an extensive library that he encouraged her to use. One evening, about 2 weeks after her arrival, Josephine found herself alone in the front room with Kieran after Mrs. Chen had retired for the night. He was reading a new volume of poetry while she mended one of his shirts by the light of an oil lamp. "May I ask you something, Miss Winters?" Kieran said suddenly, setting his book aside. "Of course. What exactly did you say in church that day, the day that led to all this?" Josephine's hands stilled. The reverend was preaching about the natural order of things, that women were created to serve and obey, not to lead or decide. He cited Eve's sin as proof of women's inherent weakness of character and mind. She took a deep breath. I suggested that if God had intended women to be silent followers, He wouldn't have given us minds capable of independent thought. I pointed out that Jesus Himself showed great respect for women's intelligence and faith. And for that, they cast you out. Kieran's voice held quiet indignation. It wasn't just what I said, but that I said it at all. Women don't interrupt sermons in Oak Ridge, or most places, I imagine. Josephine resumed her mending. The reverend gave me a chance to recant publicly the following Sunday. When I refused, the church elders voted to remove me from my teaching position and effectively shunned me. Kieran was quiet for a long moment. I meant what I said that first night, Miss Winters. In this house, you're free to speak your mind. I'd rather hear 10 uncomfortable truths than one comfortable lie, even if those truths challenge your own beliefs, Josephine asked, genuinely curious, especially then. A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. How else would I learn anything new? Something shifted between them in that moment, a deepening of mutual respect that felt significant to Josephine. Later, as she readied for bed, she found herself reflecting on Kieran Donovan's unusual openness to being challenged. In her experience, men of means and position guarded their authority jealously. Yet here was a man who seemed to value honesty above deference. Spring blossomed into early summer, and Josephine found herself genuinely content at Willow Creek. She exchanged letters with her one remaining friend in Oak Ridge, the widow Mills, who had quietly slipped Josephine extra money the day she left town. Mrs. Mills reported that Reverend Thornton still occasionally used Josephine as an example of dangerous feminine rebellion, but that some in the congregation had begun to question his harsh judgment. One Sunday morning in June, Josephine was surprised when Kieran appeared at breakfast in his best shirt and polished boots. "Are you joining us for church today, Miss Winters?" he asked casually. She hadn't attended services since leaving Oak Ridge, wary of facing similar judgment in Silver Creek. "I hadn't planned to. There's a new preacher at the Methodist church in town. Younger fellow, educated back east, might be worth hearing what he has to say." Mrs. Chen, who never attended church herself, nodded encouragingly. "Good to go. New dress I altered for you in your room." Josephine hesitated. The thought of sitting in a pew again, of being scrutinized by strangers who might have heard about her rebellion, made her stomach knot. But something in Kieran's steady gaze gave her courage. "I suppose it wouldn't hurt to listen to one sermon," she conceded. An hour later, Josephine sat beside Kieran in his buggy, wearing the dress Mrs. Chen had altered, a lovely blue calico that complemented her eyes. The Methodist church in Silver Creek was smaller than the Baptist church in Oak Ridge, a simple white clapboard building with a modest steeple. "I should warn you," Kieran said as he helped her down from the buggy, "people will talk. A single woman arriving with a single man. I'm your housekeeper's assistant, Mr. Donovan. Surely that's explanation enough," he smiled slightly. "You'd think so." Inside, the church was already filling with families and couples. Kieran guided Josephine to a pew about halfway to the front, nodding to acquaintances as they passed. She felt the weight of curious stares but held her head high. The new preacher, Reverend James Hollies, according to the program, was indeed young, perhaps 30, with an earnest face and thoughtful eyes. His sermon was on the Beatitudes, focusing particularly on "Blessed are the peacemakers," and what it meant to create true peace rather than mere absence of conflict. "Peace is not silence," Reverend Hollies said at one point, his gaze sweeping the congregation. "Peace is not the suppression of difficult questions or the avoidance of uncomfortable truths. True peace comes from honest dialogue, from listening as much as speaking, from valuing each person's God-given wisdom." Josephine felt Kieran glance at her, but she kept her eyes on the preacher, her heart beating faster. This was so different from Reverend Thornton's sermons, which had always emphasized obedience and tradition above all. After the service, Kieran introduced her to several people, including Reverend Hollis himself. The young minister shook her hand warmly. "Miss Winters, Mr. Donovan tells me you've recently joined our community. Welcome to Silver Creek." "Thank you, Reverend. Your sermon was thought-provoking." "I'm glad to hear it. I believe the church should be a place that encourages thinking, not discourages it," he smiled. "I hope we'll see you again next Sunday." As they walked back to the buggy, Josephine felt lighter than she had in months. "Thank you for suggesting this, Mr. Donovan. It was healing in a way. I thought it might be." He helped her up into the buggy. "Reverend Hollis arrived about a month ago. His predecessor was cut from the same cloth as your Reverend Thornton, I'm afraid. The change has been refreshing." On the ride back to the ranch, they discussed the sermon, finding they shared similar views on many points. Josephine was struck again by how easy it was to talk with Kieran, how he listened to her thoughts with genuine interest rather than merely waiting for his turn to speak. "Would you like to stop by the creek before heading back?" Kieran asked as they neared the ranch property. "It's a pleasant spot on a warm day like today." The suggestion was unexpected but welcome. "I'd like that very much." Kieran guided the buggy off the main road onto a narrower trail that wound through a stand of cottonwood trees. The sound of running water grew louder until they emerged at the bank of a clear creek, dappled sunlight dancing on its surface. He helped Josephine down and spread a blanket on a grassy spot near the water. "This is beautiful," Josephine said, sitting carefully to avoid wrinkling her dress too badly. "Is this where Willow Creek Ranch got its name?" "It is." Kieran sat beside her, leaving a respectable distance between them. "When I first saw this land, it was the height of summer, hot and dry everywhere except along this creek. The willows were green and full, providing shade and life when everything else looked barren. I knew then this was where I wanted to build my home." "How long have you been in America?" Josephine asked, realizing she knew little of his history before the ranch. 22 years now. I was 16 when we left Ireland. My parents, 3 sisters, and I sailed from Cork in '56 after the worst of the famine but still desperate times." His expression grew distant. "We landed in Boston. Father found work on the docks, but the winters were harsh and he never fully recovered from the hunger back home. He died our 2nd year there." "I'm sorry," Josephine said softly. "What about your mother and sisters?" "Mother remarried a good man, a carpenter. My sisters all wed eventually. I was the restless one. Headed west when I was 20, worked cattle drives in Texas, saved every penny." He smiled faintly. "Struck out for California thinking I'd find gold, found this land instead, never regretted it." "You've built something remarkable," Josephine observed, looking back toward where the ranch buildings were just visible in the distance. "Some days I still can't believe it's mine." Kieran met her gaze. "But a ranch is just buildings and land without people to share it with." There was something in his tone that made Josephine's heart beat faster. Before she could respond, a fat raindrop landed on her cheek, followed quickly by another. "We'd better head back," Kieran said, looking up at the suddenly darkening sky. "Summer storms move in fast out here." They barely made it to the buggy before the rain began in earnest, a warm deluge that had them both laughing as they scrambled for cover. By the time they reached the ranch house, they were soaked through despite Kieran's coat, which he draped over Josephine's shoulders. "Mrs. Chen clucked disapprovingly when they entered, dripping water onto the polished floor. "Both change clothes now. I make hot tea, catch death of cold otherwise." Later, warm and dry in a fresh dress, Josephine sat in the kitchen with a cup of Mrs. Chen's ginger tea, listening to the rain drum on the roof. Kieran joined them, his hair still damp but wearing dry clothes. "I'm sorry about your dress," he said to Josephine. "I should have paid more attention to the weather." "It's just a dress," she replied. "And worth it for the view of the creek. Thank you for showing me." Mrs. Chen exchanged a knowing look with Kieran that Josephine couldn't quite interpret. The older woman busied herself with supper preparations. humming softly under her breath a Chinese melody that Josephine had come to find soothing. That evening, after Mrs. Chen had retired, Josephine found herself once again alone with Kieran in the front room. Rain continued to fall outside, creating a cozy atmosphere as they sat near the small fire he'd built to ward off the unusual chill. "May I ask you something personal, Miss Winters?" Kieran said after a comfortable silence. "You may ask." "I reserve the right not to answer," she replied with a small smile. "Fair enough." He seemed to consider his words carefully. "Was there someone in Oak Ridge, someone you left behind?" The question surprised her. "You mean a suitor?" "No. I had a few interested parties over the years, but none I felt strongly about." She paused. "My views on a woman's place in marriage aren't widely appreciated. Most men expect a wife who will defer to them in all things." "And that's not the kind of wife you'd be," Kieran observed. "No. I believe marriage should be a partnership of equals, each respecting the other's mind and heart." Josephine met his gaze. "My parents had such a marriage. Father consulted mother on everything from household finances to medical cases. He valued her intelligence and perspective." "They sound like remarkable people." "They were. I've never been willing to settle for less than what they had." She hesitated. "May I ask you the same question? Was there ever someone special for you?" Kieran looked into the fire. "Once, Hannah, daughter of another rancher, about 10 years ago. We courted for nearly a year. I thought we understood each other, wanted the same things." His expression grew rueful. "Turned out she expected me to sell this place and move back east where her family had connections. When I refused, she ended things." "I'm sorry." "Don't be. Better to discover such fundamental differences before marriage than after." He smiled slightly. "Since then, I've been too busy building this ranch to court properly. At least that's what I tell myself." "And what Mrs. Chen tells you regularly, if I'm not mistaken," Josephine added with a light laugh. "Mrs. Chen has been trying to marry me off since she arrived 5 years ago. She's subtle as a charging bull about it, too." They shared a laugh that felt intimate in the firelit room. When Josephine finally rose to retire for the night, Kieran stood as well, closer than strictly proper. "Thank you for coming to church today," he said softly. "It meant a great deal to me." "Thank you for inviting me," she replied, suddenly aware of how tall he was, how the firelight caught the angles of his face. For a moment she thought he might say something more, might even step closer. Instead, he stepped back slightly. "Good night, Miss Winters. Good night, Mr. Donovan." As summer progressed, Josephine found herself spending more time with Kieran beyond her duties in the house. He invited her to ride with him to check on new calves, taught her to fish in the creek that gave the ranch its name, and began including her in discussions about ranch operations. For her part, Josephine reorganized his library, helped him draft correspondence to cattle buyers, and even assisted with the ranch's ledgers when she mentioned her facility with numbers. They attended church together each Sunday, which naturally led to speculation among the townspeople of Silver Creek. Josephine was aware of the whispers, but found she cared less than she might have expected. Reverend Hollis continued to impress her with his progressive sermons, and she even joined the church's newly formed Ladies' Auxiliary, which focused on community improvement projects. One particularly hot July afternoon, Josephine was in the kitchen with Mrs. Chen, preparing preserves from the cherry trees that grew near the creek when Benjamin appeared at the back door, his expression urgent. "Miss Winters, could you come quick?" The boss took a bad fall checking the south fence line. His horse stepped in a gopher hole. Josephine's heart lurched. "How badly is he hurt?" "Can't tell for sure. He's conscious but in pain. Says his leg's broken, maybe ribs too. We've got him on a makeshift stretcher, bringing him in now." "I'll prepare his room," Mrs. Chen said immediately, already moving toward the stairs. "I'll get my father's medical bag," Josephine added, grateful she'd brought the doctor's tools with her. By the time the ranch hands carried Kieran into the house, Josephine had gathered supplies and laid them out in his bedroom. Her father had taught her basic medical care, including how to set bones, though she'd never had to do it alone before. Kieran's face was gray with pain, but he managed a tight smile when he saw her. "Sorry about this, Miss Winters, clumsy of me." "Save your strength, Mr. Donovan. We need to see how bad it is." Examining him was an intimate process that would have been scandalous under any other circumstances. With Mrs. Chen's help, Josephine cut away his pant leg to reveal an obvious break in his left shin. The bone hadn't broken through the skin, but the leg was already swelling alarmingly. "This needs to be set," she said, meeting his eyes. "It's going to hurt terribly." "I trust you," Kieran replied simply. Josephine had Benjamin and another ranch hand hold Kieran steady while she manipulated the broken bone back into alignment. Kieran's strangled cry of pain tore at her heart, but she worked quickly, splinting the leg securely. His ribs were badly bruised but not broken, a small mercy. After giving him laudanum for the pain, Josephine sat beside his bed, monitoring his breathing as he drifted into an uneasy sleep. Mrs. Chen brought her tea and insisted she eat something, but Josephine couldn't leave his side. "You care for him," Mrs. Chen observed quietly. "More than housekeeper should care for employer," Josephine didn't deny it. "I do." "Good, he care for you too stubborn to say it first." The older woman patted Josephine's shoulder. "He heal faster with you watching over him." Over the next few weeks, Josephine became Kieran's primary caretaker. The forced proximity as she changed his bandages, helped him eat, and read to him during long afternoons deepened their connection in ways that might have taken months under normal circumstances. Kieran was a difficult patient at times, frustrated by his immobility and worried about ranch operations, but he never directed his irritation at Josephine. "You're a natural healer," he told her one evening as she checked his splint. "Like your father must have been." "Father always said the most important quality in a doctor is paying attention. People's bodies tell stories if you know how to listen," she smiled. "You're healing well, the swelling is almost gone and the bone seems to be knitting properly. Thanks to your care." He caught her hand as she straightened. "Josephine." It was the first time he'd used her given name, and the sound of it in his deep voice sent warmth through her. "Yes," she prompted when he hesitated. "I've been thinking, during all these hours lying here, about the ranch, about the future." His thumb traced circles on the back of her hand. "About you." Josephine's heart raced. "What about me? You've become essential here, not just as Mrs. Chen's assistant or even as my nurse. You're part of Willow Creek now. I can't imagine the place without you." Before she could respond, Benjamin knocked on the door frame. "Sorry to interrupt, boss, but there's a problem with the new bull. He's broken through the South Corral fence." The moment shattered. Kieran released Josephine's hand with obvious reluctance. "Go see what Benjamin needs, would you?" "My ledger's in the study desk. There should be enough in the cash box for fence repairs." By the time the crisis with the bull was resolved, the intimate moment had passed. Kieran didn't refer to their interrupted conversation again that day or the next, leaving Josephine to wonder what exactly he'd been working towards saying. August brought the hottest days of summer, and despite his leg still healing, Kieran insisted on resuming at least some of his duties. Josephine fashioned him a crutch that allowed limited mobility, and he spent hours on the porch overseeing ranch operations from afar, clearly chafing at the restrictions his injury imposed. One sweltering afternoon, Josephine brought him lemonade on the porch, where he sat with account books spread across a small table. "You should be resting," she chided gently, setting the glass within his reach. "I've rested enough to last a lifetime," he grumbled, but his expression softened as he looked up at her. "Join me, it's cooler out here than inside." Josephine settled into the chair beside him, grateful for the slight breeze that stirred the heavy air. "The preserves are all finished, Mrs. Chen says we have enough to last through winter and still have some to sell at the Harvest Festival." "You've transformed this place," Kieran said, his tone serious. "Before you came, it was a functioning ranch. Now it's starting to feel like a real home, Mrs. Chen deserves most of the credit for that. Mrs. Chen has been here 5 years. The difference since your arrival is noticeable." He set aside his ledger. You know, when I offered you that job in town, I never expected. A rider approaching at a gallop interrupted him. Josephine recognized the telegraph operator's son from Silver Creek, Mr. Donovan, the boy called, reining in his horse. Got an urgent wire for you, sir. Kieran took the yellow paper, frowning as he read its contents. His expression darkened. Bad news. Josephine asked when the boy had ridden away. My sister Margaret in Boston. She's very ill consumption. The doctors don't think she'll last the month. He folded the paper carefully. I need to go east. Her husband died last year and there are 3 children to think about. Of course you must go, Josephine said immediately. When will you leave? Tomorrow, if I can arrange it. The train from Sacramento would be fastest. He looked troubled. I don't know how long I'll be gone. Weeks, certainly, maybe months if the children need relocating. The ranch will manage without you for a time. Benjamin is capable and Mrs. Chen and I can handle the household. Kieran nodded, distracted. Would you help me make arrangements? I need to draft letters for the bank, the cattle buyer in San Francisco. Whatever you need, Josephine promised. They worked through the night, preparing everything Kieran would need for an extended absence. Josephine packed his trunk while he dictated letters and instructions for Benjamin. Mrs. Chen prepared food for his journey, her usual stoicism replaced by obvious concern. Morning came too quickly. Benjamin hitched the wagon to take Kieran to Silver Creek, where he would catch the stagecoach to Sacramento and then the train east. As the men loaded his trunk, Kieran drew Josephine aside on the porch. I've left everything arranged with the bank. You'll have access to funds for running the household and paying the men. He pressed a folded document into her hand. This gives you legal authority to act in my stead while I'm away. Josephine stared at the paper. This is a significant responsibility, Mr. Donovan. Kieran, he corrected softly. After everything, I think you can use my given name, Josephine. She smiled despite the heaviness in her heart. Kieran then. I trust you completely. His expression grew serious. There's something else I need to say before I go. Something I've been trying to find the right moment to tell you. Yes, Josephine's pulse quickened. He broke off, glancing at Benjamin, who was waiting by the wagon. Damn it, there's no time now. I'll write to you. Please write to me as well. Letters can be sent to my sister's address. He handed her another slip of paper. Of course I'll write, Josephine promised. For a moment she thought he might embrace her, might even kiss her. Instead, he took her hand and pressed it firmly between both of his. Take care of our home, Josephine. I'll return as soon as I can. Then he was gone, the wagon raising dust as it rolled down the drive toward town. Josephine stood on the porch long after it disappeared from view, the papers he'd given her clutched in her hand. He come back, Mrs. Chen said, appearing silently beside her. For you, he come back. Josephine nodded, unable to speak past the tightness in her throat. She desperately hoped the older woman was right. The first letter arrived 2 weeks after Kieran's departure, detailing his journey east and his sister's condition, which was dire but not yet hopeless. Josephine read it aloud to Mrs. Chen, both women relieved to hear he'd arrived safely. What Mrs. Chen didn't see was the final paragraph, which Josephine kept to herself. I find myself thinking of you constantly, Josephine. Of your smile when you're amused by something I've said. Of your quiet competence in managing whatever task is before you. Of the way the ranch already seems to recognize you as its mistress though you've been here such a short time. There are things I should have said before leaving, words that seemed too soon or too presumptuous then, but which now press against my heart demanding expression. When I return, we must speak plainly of the future of our future if you're willing. Until then, please know that Willow Creek is in your hands because my heart is as well. Josephine wrote back immediately, managing the ranch affairs with one hand while holding her heart with the other. September came, bringing cooler temperatures and the first hints of autumn. The harvest festival in Silver Creek approached, and despite Kieran's absence, Josephine decided Willow Creek should participate as usual, selling preserves and offering hay rides for the children. His letters continued regularly. each ending with increasingly clear declarations of his feelings. Margaret's condition stabilized temporarily, but remained grave. The children aged 12, 9, and 6 were bewildered by their mother's illness and their uncle's sudden appearance. Kieran wrote of his discussions with them about potentially coming west to live at Willow Creek, where a certain remarkable woman might help ease their transition to a new life. Josephine found herself falling in love through these letters, with a man she'd already begun to care for deeply before his departure. His written voice was thoughtful and often wryly humorous, revealing layers to Kieran she hadn't fully appreciated during their time together. In late September, Reverend Hollis stopped by the ranch unexpectedly. Josephine welcomed him into the front room where he accepted a cup of coffee but seemed unusually hesitant. "I've come on a somewhat delicate matter, Miss Winters," he finally said. "It concerns you and Mr. Donovan." Josephine tensed. "What about us, Reverend? There has been talk in town, with Mr. Donovan away and you remaining here managing his affairs." He cleared his throat. "Some people are questioning the propriety of the arrangement." "I see." Josephine kept her expression neutral. "Mr. Donovan left me with legal authority to manage the ranch in his absence. Mrs. Chen is here as well. There's nothing improper occurring." "I understand that," Reverend Hollis assured her, "but perception often matters as much as reality in small communities. I'm concerned that your reputation, my reputation, was already in tatters when I arrived in Silver Creek, Reverend," Josephine interrupted, more sharply than she'd intended. "I was the woman who spoke out of turn in church, remember? The troublemaker who challenged a man of God." The young minister looked chagrined. "I meant no offense, Miss Winters. In fact, I admire your courage in standing by your convictions. I merely wanted to warn you of the gossip and offer my support. My church stands behind you." Josephine's anger deflated. "I apologize for my tone. It seems I'm still sensitive about such matters. Understandably so." Reverend Hollis smiled kindly. "For what it's worth, I believe Mr. Donovan chose wisely in entrusting Willow Creek to your care. Your management of the ranch's contribution to the Harvest Festival has been impressive." After the Reverend left, Josephine sat in Kieran's chair in the study, composing her regular letter with an added urgency. She described the encounter with Reverend Hollis and the town gossip, not hiding her frustration. "It seems a woman cannot exist independently without inviting speculation and judgment. If I returned to town to avoid impropriety, who would manage affairs here? Would a man in my position face similar scrutiny? I think not. Yet I find I care less about these whispers than I once would have. Willow Creek has become my home in a way Oak Ridge never truly was, despite my family's long history there. Perhaps this is what it means to find where one belongs, caring more about the rightness of one's place than others' opinions of it." October brought Margaret's passing, a sad but not unexpected development that Kieran related in a grief-tinged letter. He would need to remain in Boston through November at least, settling his sister's affairs and making arrangements for the children, who would indeed be coming west with him. 3 children, Josephine murmured to herself as she read the letter by lamplight in her room. Willow Creek will need to adjust to young voices again. She wrote back immediately, expressing her condolences and assuring him that preparations would be made for the children's arrival. Secretly, she began converting 2 of the unused bedrooms into spaces suitable for young people, ordering books and simple toys from the Silver Creek General Store. "You make nest," Mrs. Chen observed with approval as Josephine arranged furniture in what would become the boys' room. "Good mother already." "I'm simply trying to make the transition easier for them," Josephine demurred, though the thought of being a mother to Kieran's niece and nephews made her heart swell with unexpected longing. November brought early snow to the foothills, unusual but not unprecedented according to Benjamin. The ranch hands worked diligently to ensure the cattle had access to feed and unfrozen water. Josephine found herself making more executive decisions than she'd anticipated, gaining confidence with each challenge overcome. Her most recent letter from Kieran indicated he would be returning in early December, children in tow. "Prepare for chaos," he'd written. "James is serious and responsible beyond his years. Charlie is full of mischief but has a heart of gold. And little Sarah hasn't spoken above a whisper since her mother fell ill. They are wary of the journey west but curious about the ranch, and especially about the woman I cannot stop talking about." As the date of their arrival approached, Josephine found herself uncharacteristically nervous. What if the children disliked her? What if the reality of Kieran's return didn't match the connection they'd built through letters? What if he'd romanticized her in absence and would be disappointed when confronted with the ordinary woman she was? The morning they were due to arrive, a fresh snowfall blanketed Willow Creek in pristine white. Josephine had been up since dawn, working with Mrs. Chen to prepare a special welcome meal and making final touches to the children's rooms. When Benjamin reported the stagecoach had been spotted on the road from town, her hands trembled so badly she had to set down the dish she was drying. "Go," Mrs. Chen ordered, shooing her toward the door. "Meet them outside. Children need to see new home with someone's smiling welcome." Josephine donned her coat and stepped onto the porch just as the wagon Benjamin had sent to collect them from the stagecoach station crested the hill. Her heart pounded as she made out 4 figures Kieran and 3 smaller shapes bundled against the cold. The wagon pulled up to the house, and Kieran jumped down despite his still healing leg. He looked thinner than when he'd left, with new lines around his eyes speaking of the strain of recent months. But when he saw Josephine, his entire face transformed with a smile that warmed her to her toes. "Josephine," he said simply, crossing the space between them in long strides. Before she could respond, he'd swept her into an embrace, lifting her slightly off the ground. The propriety she'd maintained through all their correspondence vanished as she wrapped her arms around his neck, breathing in the scent of him leather and soap, and something uniquely Kieran. "Welcome home," she whispered as he set her back on her feet, suddenly aware of 3 pairs of curious eyes watching from the wagon. Kieran kept one arm around her waist as he turned toward the children. "James, Charlie, Sarah, this is Miss Winters, the lady I told you about." The oldest boy, James, nodded solemnly. Charlie, the middle child, offered a gap-toothed grin. Little Sarah, barely visible beneath a woolen scarf, regarded Josephine with wide, solemn eyes. "Welcome to Willow Creek," Josephine said warmly. "Mrs. Chen has hot chocolate waiting inside, and there's fresh bread just out of the oven." That last bit of information brought Charlie scrambling down from the wagon. "Is it true you have horses here, Uncle Kieran? Real ones we can ride?" "Indeed we do," Kieran laughed, helping Sarah down and setting her gently on the snow-covered ground. "But first, let's get you all warmed up." The next hours were a flurry of activity, bringing in trunks, showing the children their rooms, introducing them to Mrs. Chen, whom Charlie immediately dubbed Chinese grandmother, to the older woman's pretend consternation but obvious delight. Through it all, Kieran kept finding reasons to touch Josephine a hand at the small of her back, fingers brushing as they passed dishes at lunch, a gentle squeeze of her shoulder as she showed Sarah the dolls she'd acquired for the little girl's room. It wasn't until after supper, when the children had finally succumbed to the exhaustion of travel and emotion and been tucked into their new beds, that Josephine and Kieran found themselves alone in the front room. A fire crackled in the hearth, casting dancing shadows across the familiar space that somehow felt different with his return. "You've performed miracles here," Kieran said, gesturing to encompass the house and all that lay beyond. "Benjamin tells me the ranch has never run more smoothly. Mrs. Chen says you've become the heart of the household, and I return to find you've somehow prepared perfect rooms for 3 children you've never met." Josephine smiled. "I wanted them to feel welcome, to know this could be home. It already is because you're here." Kieran moved closer, taking both her hands in his. I meant to do this properly to court you with propriety and patience, but these months away have shown me that life is too uncertain, too precious for such delays. He sank to one knee before her, still holding her hands. Josephine Winters, I love you. I've loved you since that day by the creek, perhaps even before. When I said you could speak freely in my house, I never imagined you would speak so directly to my heart. Will you marry me? Will you be mother to these children who need one so desperately? Will you make Willow Creek truly yours as it longs to be? Tears filled Josephine's eyes. Yes, she whispered, then louder. Yes, Kieran Donovan, I will marry you. I love you too. He rose and gathered her in his arms, his kiss conveying all the longing and love of their months apart. When they finally parted, both breathless, Josephine laughed softly. What's amusing? Kieran asked, brushing a strand of hair from her face. I was just thinking being banished from Oak Ridge was the best thing that ever happened to me. Remind me to send Reverend Thornton a thank you note, Kieran murmured against her hair. Perhaps we should invite him to the wedding, Josephine suggested impishly. Along with the entire congregation, they could witness firsthand what becomes of women who speak their minds. They'd see a woman loved and respected for her thoughts, not despite them. Kieran kissed her again, more gently this time. When shall we have this wedding? Spring seems a long wait. Christmas, Josephine decided. The children should have something joyful to celebrate, and I don't want to wait either. Christmas it is. His smile held all the promise of their future together. Reverend Hollies will be pleased. He's been not so subtly encouraging me to formalize my relationship with Miss Winters since I returned. They were married on Christmas Eve, 1878, in the Methodist Church in Silver Creek, with Reverend Hollies officiating. The children stood beside them, James solemn in his new suit, Charlie fidgeting until the critical moment, and Sarah, who had begun speaking again in full sentences the week before, serving as flower girl. Mrs. Chen wept openly, an unprecedented display of emotion from the usually reserved woman. The entire town turned out for the ceremony, most having overcome their initial reservations about the outspoken woman from Oak Ridge. Josephine wore a gown of ivory satin trimmed with her mother's lace, and Kieran looked so handsome in his black suit that she nearly forgot her vows when the time came to speak them. I, Josephine, take you, Kieran, to be my lawfully wedded husband, she said clearly, her voice carrying through the church. I promise to love and respect you, to share my thoughts honestly and listen to yours with an open heart, to stand beside you through all of life's joys and sorrows, as long as we both shall live. Kieran's vows echoed hers, with one addition that brought fresh tears to her eyes. I promise your voice will always be valued in our home, your wisdom always respected, your spirit always free to soar. As they emerged from the church into the crisp winter air, Josephine caught sight of a familiar figure at the back of the crowd, Mrs. Mills from Oak Ridge, who'd traveled all this way despite her arthritis. Beside her stood a younger woman Josephine recognized as the Reverend's daughter, who gave her a shy smile of congratulation. I invited them, Kieran whispered in her ear as they made their way to the waiting buggy, festooned with evergreen boughs and red ribbons. Mrs. Mills has been corresponding with me since September. Seems Oak Ridge is experiencing something of a small rebellion among its women. Your example has inspired more than you know. Josephine's heart swelled with unexpected joy at the thought that her stand might have created ripples beyond her own life. She squeezed Kieran's hand as he helped her into the buggy. Take us home, husband, she said, relishing the new word on her tongue. As you wish, wife, he replied with equal pleasure, gathering the reins. The children piled in around them, Sarah on Josephine's lap and the boys squeezing in beside Kieran. As they drove away from the church toward Willow Creek Ranch toward home, snow began to fall gently, dusting Josephine's hair with tiny diamonds that caught the winter sunlight. 5 years later, spring 1884, Josephine stood on the porch of Willow Creek Ranch, watching the children race across the meadow now vibrant with wildflowers. Sarah, at 11, had her golden hair in braids that bounced as she ran, trying to keep up with her brothers and little William, Josephine and Kieran's 3-year-old son who toddled after his older siblings with determined steps. "Careful with your brother," Josephine called, one hand resting on the gentle swell of her belly where their second child grew. James, now 17 and nearly as tall as his uncle-turned-father, scooped William up and set him on his shoulders, earning a squeal of delight from the little boy. At 14, Charlie had developed into a skilled horseman who dreamed of competing in rodeos, though Josephine had extracted a promise that he'd finish school first. The sound of a wagon approaching drew Josephine's attention. She smiled when she recognized Reverend Hollis and his wife Emily, who had become dear friends over the years. "Right on time for tea," Josephine called as they pulled up. Emily, heavily pregnant with their first child, accepted Kieran's help down from the wagon. "We bring news," she said excitedly. "The women's suffrage resolution passed at the state assembly. It's only a small step, but it means the issue will be brought before voters next year." "Wonderful news." Josephine embraced her friend carefully, mindful of their matching conditions. "The letter-writing campaign must have helped. Your articles in the Sacramento newspaper certainly did," Reverend Hollis added, shaking Kieran's hand. "They're being reprinted as far east as Chicago, from what I hear." Josephine felt a familiar surge of gratitude. After their wedding, Kieran had encouraged her to write about her experiences and her views on women's equality. What had begun as occasional letters to the editor had developed into a regular column that was indeed being syndicated in newspapers across the country. Mrs. Chen appeared at the door, announcing that tea was ready. As they settled in the expanded front room the ranch house had grown along with their family, Josephine couldn't help reflecting on how much had changed in 6 years. Oak Ridge had a new minister now, a younger man who'd invited Josephine to speak to the congregation last Christmas when she and Kieran had visited Mrs. Mills. The town that had once banished her now pointed to her with pride as our famous authoress. More importantly, Willow Creek had flourished. The ranch had doubled in size, and Kieran had started a breeding program for horses that was gaining recognition throughout California. The household had grown too, not just with the addition of William and the expected baby, but with 3 young women who boarded at the ranch, while Josephine tutored them in subjects ranging from literature to basic medical care. Kieran entered from his study, where he'd been showing Reverend Hollis the plans for the school they were building on the edge of the ranch property, a place where girls and boys would receive equal education, with Josephine as headmistress. He caught her eye across the room and smiled the special smile that, even after 5 years of marriage, still made her heart skip. He crossed to her side, placing a hand on her shoulder. "What are you thinking about so seriously, love?" he asked quietly. "How speaking up in church turned out to be the best mistake I ever made," she replied, covering his hand with hers. "Not a mistake at all," Kieran corrected gently. "The beginning of exactly the life you were meant to live." As their friends and family chatted around them, as the children's laughter drifted in through the open windows, as the spring breeze carried the scent of new growth and possibility, Josephine Donovan thought of that long-ago Sunday in Oak Ridge, and silently thanked God for giving her the courage to stand and speak her truth, and for leading her to the man who had said those life-changing words, "Speak all you want in my house." In finding her voice, she had found her home,